So why did Paul write Romans? Well, this is a vexed question, heavily debated, because it's such a monumental letter, and he himself articulates some of his own reasons. First of all, he's planned many times to come to Rome, he says in chapter 1, to preach the gospel, to have a harvest amongst them. And of course, this would probably mean winning new converts, but also to strengthen the Roman church in its commitment to Christ. In Romans 15, he mentions that he's heading to Jerusalem, and he asks for them to pray for him, that his offering would be acceptable in that city. And so there's a prayer need there. Thirdly, he plans to go to Spain, and he's going to take the gospel there to virgin territory where the gospel's never been preached, something Paul loves to do. He's finished his work, he says, from Jerusalem around to right across to western Greece, to Illyricum, and across into Rome, and he wants to take the gospel into Spain, and he wants their support. So some people see a real missionary motive here. Paul lays out his gospel for them, that they would support him in this great venture. However, it's probably not Paul's gospel per se that is in Romans. It's certainly about the gospel. It's certainly a presentation of the gospel, but it emphasizes certain things about law and justification, particularly justification by faith, not through works of the law. One does not have to become a Jew to be a follower of Jesus. So Paul seems to be wanting to cement the law-free gospel in the Roman church, which of course is critical because all roads lead to Rome and all roads lead out of Rome. And if the Roman church, which would soon become the center of Christianity, and so we get the Roman Catholic Church later on, the center of Christianity, the gospel must be well established there. And it's been a tumultuous time in the church up to this point. The Roman church was no doubt planted at Pentecost from Roman pilgrims who took the gospel back. Perhaps Junia and Andronicus, who are mentioned in Romans 16, were two of those people who brought the gospel back. And it was probably planted in a very Jewish way, probably amongst Jews in the synagogues. We have some clear evidence that in AD 49, the church was full of disturbances about a certain Christus. So there were fights amongst Jews over the identity of this figure, which is probably a name for Christ. The Emperor Claudius expelled the Jews from the city. So suddenly there were no Jews left in the Christian church of Rome, only those Gentiles that had become Christians. At around the same time, across in Jerusalem, the church met to discuss whether or not a Christian needed to submit to the laws of Moses, particularly circumcision, to be saved, to be included in God's people. And it was decided that they didn't need to. Now, Paul, after that journey, had set out on a second mission journey with Silas, one of the bearers of the letter, and had probably made sure that the church was delivered to Rome in that period. He may have wanted to go himself, but as a Jew, he couldn't. So in that period where the Jews were expelled from Rome, the church became much more Gentile, with Gentile leadership. Now, in AD 54, Claudius died, and his edict was rescinded. So at that point, the Jews, many of the Jews, like Priscilla and Aquila, who we read of in Acts 18, had left Rome because of this Claudius edict, returned to Rome. And probably some of them were leaders, and there were probably tensions between the emerging Gentile leaders in church and the Jews who were returning. I think we can tell from writings like Philippians 3 and Colossians 2 that the Judaizing problem was still around. Some Christians were not completely convinced that you didn't have to be circumcised, as we read in Genesis 17, and come under the law of Moses to be a Christian. So it seems to me that Romans is written to put an end to that debate once and for all. There is space for differences over matters that are non-essential, like what we eat and holy days, what days we consider sacred, Romans 14 and 15. But otherwise, it is by faith that we are justified by faith. The whole thrust of the letter is to bring that home, that in Jesus we have the righteousness of God expressed, and that we ourselves are declared righteous when we believe in Jesus. Nothing else is needed. We don't have to come under Torah or under any works. We simply have to have an authentic faith in Jesus, a sincere yes to Jesus as Lord and Savior. And so the letter then develops what that then means. How do we live now that we have been justified by faith? If we're not living by the law, we live by the Spirit. What of the place of Israel and the purposes of God? Romans 9 to 11. What does it mean to live as a Christian? Romans 12 and 13. The benefits of salvation, Romans 5 to 8. So Paul lays all this out. So he has a multiplicity of purposes in mind. One is to prepare for his trip to Rome. Two is to prepare for his trip to Spain. Three, preparing for his trip to Jerusalem before that. And four, to ensure that the gospel of grace through faith is established in Rome so that it can then go from there to the world. And indeed, that is what happened. And Rome did become the center of Christianity. So we can say that Paul's letter of Romans was successful in its